One of today's projects, a special project, is this one right here. This piece came to me a while back and it was in really rough shape. Somebody attempted some epoxy work on it before it was dried. So when I received it from the customer that wanted it fixed up, it was 1.5 inches thick on one end, it was 3.5 inches thick on the other end, and it was curved. The customer had asked me to flatten it, put it in the sander and flatten it, and I had to put a straight edge across it to show the customer that if I sanded it, once that curve came out, there would actually be nothing left. So part of this project was to saw it almost all the way through and unfold part of it and fold the other part to make it flat. And once I got one side flat, I could start my sanding and epoxy process. We are down to, we're going to do the last coat today and you get to see it. This has been prepped. It's been finely sanded. It already has a coat of epoxy. And because this is willow, it's a very dry, porous wood. It sucked up epoxy in several places, so it actually needed touch-up coats. We did that. It's now sanded and ready for the final coat. Imagine the top. This is dull. After we put the epoxy on, the whole thing is going to light up like that. Those will fill up. They're very shallow. There's a couple of them. Those will fill up. It is a messy process. As long as you're willing to put up with the mess, you can end up with an awesome looking project when it's done. It was a little too slick. It moved a little too easy. So I'm just going to put an old towel on there. We're going to set the tabletop on it, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to level it. The reason we're going to level it is when we pour the epoxy, if it's not level, you lose all the epoxy off one side and then the other side doesn't get any. We will do our best to make it perfectly level. I can see walking up this way, I want to go your way just a little bit with it. That's almost right there. I could bring this side up a hair. Maybe too much. Back off a little bit. Ooh, I like that. Now I need a tiny bit. You have no idea how hard this is on the old knees. I think we're going to go with that. It's very sticky, it's very permanent. It's become very popular with the woodwork and the slabs. It is epoxy, so it's a great glue. Definitely holds things together, but I'd say the biggest reason it's become popular is you go back to something like this. Instead of looking at this wondering what you do, when you fill that with clear epoxy, you not only bond the two pieces together, but you get to look at the beauty that's in them. A lot of people like to do river tables. They'll put bright blue, orange, they'll put colors in the epoxy. I'm partial to going clear because I want to show off the wood. I have put lights underneath it. You can epoxy fill it and then go back with a router on the bottom and route a groove for an LED rope light. Yeah, it looks pretty cool when it's done. We are now prepped as far as setting this up. The next thing we have to do is actually start mixing epoxy. Normally when I mix epoxy, I do smaller batches. I'm filling in a void or a crack, strengthening something up. This is going to be an entire top coat. So I need to mix more epoxy. It's going to be a little different than I usually do. Instead of small cups, I'm going to use a 1-gallon container, and we're going to put a mixer on the Bridgeport instead of me hand stirring it. We do heat up epoxy in the microwave. We need to warm it up so it mixes better. So I save one plate when I do epoxy instead of the one I heat up my snacks on. So let's grab some epoxy and we will start measuring and start pouring. I have prepared the large mixing tub, and actually what I'm going to use, a very sophisticated measuring cup. And yes, we're going to put some gloves on. There's very little that thins it or removes it. And the only thing I found that actually removes it is this stuff. and not something I want to get on my skin. We're going to use 2-part epoxy. The old shirt I have is designated the epoxy shirt. The epoxy I use, and we're going to do clear on this one, we have a resin and a hardener, and it's a 50-50 mix or a 1-to-1 mix. So we're going to use equal parts of each. We don't have to be specific down to the gram. So as far as measuring, I've taken a sour cream cup and filled water in a measuring cup, and I know that the bottom of this blue line is 16 ounces. So basically what we're going to do is fill this twice with resin and twice with hardener. We're going to warm them up and then we will mix them. Let's start with the resin. As you can see, it's pretty thick pouring in there, and I am watching both inside the cup and I'm watching the line rise on the outside here. So that's what I'm going to watch, and when I get close to the bottom of the blue line, I will quit. Just about there. So now we'll take this cup, put it in the microwave, warm it up. I don't want it hot, but I want it warm. When this is sufficiently warm, we'll put it in the mixing cup and repeat the process. Depending on your microwave, will make a difference. I'm going to start with 30 seconds on this one. I'm accustomed to it, but I also know this is relatively a low power microwave. The one in the house is twice as strong as this. So we'll give it 30 seconds, and basically by the feel of it, I can tell whether I want to microwave it a little bit more or I want to call it good. So with both hands holding this, I can tell that it's slightly warm. Based on how warm it is, I'm going to give it another 30 seconds. The bigger the batch is, the harder it is to mix it all properly and get it right, but we're going to be okay. The reason I heat it is it makes it easier to stir, and it also helps after it's poured to get the bubbles out of it. At room temperature, it's extremely thick. If you look at it now, you can see how much it wiggles compared to when I poured it in a cup. It was rather syrupy. Now it's pretty thin. So now we're going to take this first batch of resin, and we're going to pour it in the mixing cup. And so that I don't have a lot left in the cup that messes with ratios, I'll give this about 10 seconds to drip, and then we'll go do the same thing again. All right, time for a refill. Yeah, there's the difference between room temperature and slightly heated. Off to the microwave. I'm going to do this one at a minute and probably stop it with about 10 seconds to go because I don't want it too hot. The first batch I did is borderline. So we'll wait till this gets to about 10 seconds and we'll pull it out. Another interesting little fact on epoxy is resin heats up much faster than the hardener. Put both of them in for an equal amount of time and the resin will come out hotter than the hardener. A lot of times the hardener will require a few more seconds to get to an equal temperature. So there's 50 seconds of warm up. I can tell it's not quite as warm as the last batch, but I believe it's plenty warm to do what we want. One other little trick here is I can look at this and I can see which side I poured out of. And I'm going to try and keep that so I don't end up with epoxy around the whole thing. It helps if you keep pouring out of the same spot. Okay, now we're going to warm up hardener. I have been asked, and I found out the hard way, why not just mix the two together and then put it in the microwave? I have found if you try and microwave the mixture after it has been mixed, it tends to set way too fast. So we heat them up separately. And the one time I heated up the mixture after it was mixed and went to pour it, I actually had it set while I was pouring and was able to let go of the cup. It was 6 inches above the project. I don't remember if it's Dutch Boy Paint or Sherwin-Williams. There's a paint manufacturer, and on the label of their paint, they show a can in the air with the liquid pouring out. Well, that's what happened to me with epoxy while I was pouring it. Because I had microwaved the mixture, it heated up and set. and I let go of that cup. It was about that far off the part. I should have taken a picture of it. That's actually a little hotter than I like. I don't know that I want to put that in there. That might be too warm. Okay. I have heated up the hardener beyond where I want it to be. So what I'm going to go do is I'm going to find another cup that I can measure in, and I'm going to take some cold hardener and I'm going to mix the two and bring the temperature of this down. It's a little too warm. I don't want it to set too quick. So it'll be a minute or two before I find another container. Yeah, it's not going to cool off in 5 minutes. So I think I can find another container relatively quick. Yeah, there's a few people in the house that like sour cream. So what we're going to do to correct the overheating here is I'm going to take the cup that I heated, pour it in an extra container. I will go back and measure the other part of the hardener in this, pour it in this container, and then see what it feels like temperature-wise. See, it's real here. Things don't always go according to plan. Then you have to improvise. So here is the rest of the hardener without being in the microwave. We'll pour that into the heated stuff. Notice the difference in the way it drips here. This is thicker. If anything, I'd rather have it a little on the cool side than warm. The warmer it gets, the quicker it sets. And in this case, we don't want that. So this is not something that you need a thermometer for. It's not super critical as long as you stay away from too hot. That's worst case scenario. A warm cup of coffee, not hot. If it's a hot cup of coffee, it's too hot. If it's comfortably warm, you're probably right on. So now that I've stirred this a little bit, I'm going to hold it with 2 hands. And it's not quite as warm as I like it. I'm going to go over here to the resin. The resin still feels pretty warm, maybe a little bit warmer than I'd like. So I think what I'm going to do at this point is after I add the hardener to this, it might be not as warm as I would like, but still very reasonable. So we're going to go with that. I'd rather be slightly cold than too warm. So I've set up the Bridgeport here. I'm going to put my large container in, and we're going to snug this up with the vise. In case you're wondering, how do I hold that? I've taken 2 scrap pieces of wood and I've cut the radius of the bucket in them. So what I'm going to do is snug the vise up just enough. It's a plastic bucket. You can only squeeze so hard on it. But you'll notice after I'm mixing that I end up turning the bucket. And I've got drag on it, so it will hold it, but I can still turn it. The paddle is simple. Stainless rod with a little piece of steel welded on the end. As I'm going to put the paddle in the mixture, I'm not going to start it above it. I don't want it to go everywhere. I've put the paddle down. I've hit the bottom of the bucket. I'm going to come up just a little bit. I don't want to actually scrape the bucket. Now we'll turn the machine on. We're ready to be turned it off if it splashes. So that's a little bit fast. We're going to slow it down some more. So as you look at the vortex above the paddle, I want that vortex to get close to the propeller, which will bring air in. And the whole idea here is to mix it without the bubbles. So now that this is actually rotating, I want to pour basically on top of the paddle. So as epoxy mixes, it first turns cloudy. One of the things on the checklist, how do you know when it's done? It depends a lot on how clear it gets. So it does get cloudy first, and then as you see it clear up, you know that your mixing is getting more thorough. I'm going to change the speed here. I'm going to go back to real slow, and we're going to switch gears. And we're going to try it one more time. Now that I have more liquid in here, you can see I can run the propeller faster, but I don't have a vortex that's sucking air in. So I'm going to gently turn the bucket. And after I do a couple laps like this, I'm actually going to go in with my stick and I'm going to scrape the sides because I don't want resin or hardener stuck to the side. So we're just going to do this for about 2 minutes here. Over mixing is better than under mixing. Once in a while I'll take the stick, scrape the bottom gently, and then I'll go back to the side edge here and just keep scraping the edge so that we are not left with a residue of either hardener or resin right on the edge. You see it's trying to start a vortex here, and I'm not pulling air in. I think if I was to leave this stationary, you might develop a small one. And when I say vortex, it looks like a little miniature tornado in there. And that's what we want to avoid, because that would be pulling air in the mixture. I see a few bubbles in it, but very few. I'm very happy with the way this is going so far. All right, I'm satisfied with that. So we're going to do, the first thing we do is turn it off so it doesn't splash when it comes out. We can let that drip for a minute. Now, holding this right now, it's quite warm, so I'm glad we didn't heat anything else up. Now, for the fun part, let's go put this on the table. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a bristle brush and my tub of epoxy, and I want to go around and I want to wet the edges, and then we will do the rest of the table. This is the part that gets messy. It drips all over, but it also makes sure that the edges are covered nicely, and the extra that we put on top can flow evenly over the edges. And one of the reasons I go around and brush this edge, I can always say, yeah, you put a lot on top, it'll run over the edge. Unless you coat the edge, the epoxy will run over, but it doesn't mean it will cover all the cracks and nuances that have the shape in the edge. By wetting the whole surface, whatever runs off will coat evenly then. And by the way, this is a single-use brush. Once you fill them up with epoxy, after you're done with this, the brush is done. You can use an old brush as long as it doesn't have grease in it or some kind of dirt. It doesn't have to be brand new, but as long as it doesn't have contaminants in it that affect the epoxy. Okay, we're back to the beginning. I am going to end up stepping in the epoxy on the paper, but I'm going to leave a little in the bucket. So now what I want to do is I want to move this epoxy around, but I don't want to brush it back and forth quick. Just slowly, I'm going to keep pulling it around gently. Notice the difference between what has epoxy on it and what I've sanded. Look at the colors and the grain that's coming out now. If it sets up too quick on me, I have a whole lot of sanding to do again and to do this over. And I would like to avoid that, but what I'm going to do now is, with almost no pressure on the brush, there we go, I'm just going to go over the whole piece slowly. I don't know about you, but I can actually feel some heat coming off of this. We'll find out in about 6 hours whether it was too warm or not. Worst case, if it is, I do it again. Epoxy is unusual in as thick as it is. It's also amazing when you tape up a seam and you get a leak, you realize that 4 ounces of epoxy went through a crack the size of a needle head. So now what we're going to do, even though it's warm and it's trying to set, here's the next trick. Heat gun. So I don't want to heat it so much that it sets. I don't want to stay in one place any too long. Some people use a torch for this. I've never done it. I guess it works okay. I've used the heat gun for years. I'm always a little surprised how much you can look at this and even have somebody help you with it. And you finally get in the right spot, and then you see the spot you missed. So I do see a few real light blemishes, but considering the piece I'm working with, the other thing is that will level out better than what we see after some time. One of the things I get asked about a lot, I have a lot of people that want to do their own epoxy work. And I said, that's great, go ahead. However, and they wonder, how about advice? My advice is if you want to do epoxy work, that's great, have at it, except for one thing. If you've never done it, start with scrap wood. Don't make your beautiful piece of wood, your dining room table, your dream project should not be your learning curve. So go pick out epoxy. Once you pick out epoxy, stick with the same brand. They are different. So pick one and stay with it so you get used to it. And take some scrap pieces of wood. Do your miniature table. Practice heating up and mixing and stirring it. Don't make your prize project your learning curve. That's the best piece of advice I can give you on epoxy. For right now, I'm not going to do anything. The tabletop looks good. I want the epoxy to dry. After this is dry, I will turn it upside down. I'll protect the top surface, and I will just sand these little nubs down to the point you can't feel them. I'm happy with the way this looks. I want to leave it alone. That's one of the epoxy tricks. If you like it, don't mess with it. Leave it alone, and that's where we're at right now. We're just going to leave everything quiet and settle in here and undisturbed. Usually finishing is done late in the day. I can put finish on, turn the lights off, and leave and not disturb anything. I'm actually really happy with that, the way that's leveling out. So as I look across this, I can see slight variations, but I think they're all very reasonable for this particular piece of wood. Yeah, I mean, it's not a sheet of glass. I'm okay with it. But the other thing is, after a couple hours, and that'll be the thing, in a couple hours, take a look at it, you might be surprised how level that gets. And that's one of the tricks with epoxy. You look at it and you think, you pour it on, instantly you want it all level. Sometimes it takes 2 hours to level out.